Walk out. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to stand. I want you to stand. I want you to raise your flags. I want you to raise your banners, your posters. Here comes the man of the moment. Here comes the man who has done it before, is ready to do it again, ladies and gentlemen. The Right Honorable Owen Arthur. Wear your red. Come on, wave your red. Wear your red. Wear your red.
A very wonderful good evening to all of you. I want to welcome you to my neighborhood. This is a place where I come to enjoy a wholesome family life. And I must tell you that you, the people of the Barbados Labour Party, put my family life at risk. When I walk through the crowd and see a young lady in an advanced stage of pregnancy, and she is wearing one of those flashing buttons saying, Owen is the man. I beg you, don't do that to me. I have enough issues with the Democratic Labour Party. And a man should be able to come to his neighborhood and enjoy peace. And I really do look forward to coming home to enjoy West Terrace. And, you know, to the people of West Terrace, as Bob Marley once said, I want to disturb my neighbors, but I have not come to disturb you. I have come to humbug somebody else tonight. You know, when I go through Barbados, I take a pride in some of the things that I helped to make happen. I have never claimed credit for it, but I remember when I was serving as the parliamentary secretary to Bernard St. John, he was anxious to make these gardens happen. He was a little dissatisfied with his Minister of Housing, L.B. Brathwaite, and he asked me to act as the Minister of Housing on one occasion to sign the contracts to enable these houses to be built. So I claim a kind of policy paternity for the fact that these gardens exist. And I feel that, in fairness, you should all go and vote for Sandra Husbands because they made these gardens come alive. And those were the good old days when a development like this would not be given to one man, but would be shared among 7 contractors. And we are anxious to become the government again, so that the process by which West Terrace Gardens was built, sharing up the work, doing things with fairness in mind, can once again become part and parcel of life in this country. Tonight I have come in a short speech to break a conspiracy of silence. A conspiracy of silence that stands on as a stain on the record of this country for good governance. It's a conspiracy of silence that has seen an injustice done by a bankrupt and a broken administration, simply for the purpose of elevating one of its own to a put him on a pedestal that he does not deserve to be on, and also for protecting a pal from having to face the justice that ought to be meted out to him. The question as to whether the matter at hand with which I want to deal concerns the way in which a conspiracy of silence has descended around the true facts relating to the CLICO debacle, and the way in which 35,000 of our brothers and sisters have had to have their life put in a condition of suspended animation, permanent contingency, by a government that refuses to lift the veil and give the people of this country the real facts, the truth, and nothing but the truth regarding how CLICO found itself and came to be this sorry state, regarding the role performed by a law firm of a former prime minister, regarding the greatest fraud, the greatest single fraud in the history of this country. This veil of silence and this conspiracy of silence needs to be lifted for a cleansing wind of honesty to be restored to our public affairs. And the matter with which I deal that concerns an injustice being meted out to our brothers and our sisters will determine and define the legacy and the place in our history of David Thompson. The matter with which I deal may help to determine the future of Leroy Paris. It is not in a position, we were not before in a position to shed light on a check for $3,333,000 that were paid by Thompson Associates, by CLICO to Thompson Associates. Can you see it clearly? You cannot read it in one glance because the numbers are so big. There's not 75,000, it's 3.3 million. We were not in a position before, but now we are in a position to know that these factors surrounding this check concerns one of the greatest frauds in our history. It involved the law office of David Thompson in the matter of the payment of this $3.3 million. The light to be shed exonerates, as you will hear, the law partners of David Thompson and David Thompson's and Associates and his accounting staff in relation to the circumstances surrounding this check. It leaves a trail of evidence that indicates and proves that someone other than the law partners, someone authorized to act in the name of Thompson Associates other than the law partners, to maintain an account in that name separate and distinct from the law partners' accounts, was an active participant in a scheme to defraud CLICO of $3.3 million. I want to repeat that. The evidence now indicates there's a trail of evidence now that indicates that someone other than Thompson's law partners at Thompson's Associates someone authorized to act in the name of Thompson Associates. Someone authorized to maintain an account in the name of Thompson Associates that was not the company's account, was an active partner and participant, and might have even been the instigator in a scheme to defraud CLICO of $3.3 million, and that you, the taxpayers, may have in settling CLICO to have to pay for this. Now, this matter started sometime in 2003, when 5 years in advance, a decision was made that a bonus of $10 million would be paid in 2008 to Leroy Paris. Now, David Thompson was a witness to the transaction. Now, ordinarily, you get a bonus in the year in which you have performed extraordinarily well. But I don't believe that in the whole history of mankind, there's any precedent of a man getting some company to agree to give him 5 years in advance, a bonus 5 years hence, and in the amount of $10 million without regards to the status of the company at the time when this bonus was to be paid. Were all of us in this circumstance where we could get our employers to agree to give us this kind of bonus of that amount, 5 years in advance, or we will be living in utopia. But this matter then became something that was acted upon in December 2008, when a consolidated interim invoice in the name of Thompson and Associates Attorney at Law, naming Morris King QC as consultant, and the associates being Omika Stewart, Gail Prescott, and Amelia Dare. The company no longer exists, but they have been called upon to give evidence before the judicial managers. And you know, when CLICO's problems were discovered, the Minister of Finance has no authority in the act if an insurance company has a deficit in its statutory fund, namely that every insurance company in Barbados must have a statutory fund that in which they put or designate assets so that when your policies mature, it can pay. And if there is a deficit in the fund, the minister has no authority to act. That is why I'm amused when people said, I should have done something about it, because even if it had happened under us, the law is clear that if there is a deficit in the statutory fund of an insurance company, the supervisor of insurance shall apply. It is mandatory. Shall apply to the courts. And the court should appoint a judicial manager to take over the management of the company and to investigate the circumstances why the company was brought to that circumstance and to prescribe what had to be done. But what did Thompson do? Ignored the law, appointed something called an oversight committee, because if a judicial manager had gone in then, what is being exposed now would have been exposed then. And Mr. Paris and Thompson himself wouldn't have been held up to the scrutiny that they deserve. But in 2008, Thompson Associates, in the name of, with these people cited as the lawyers, purported, and I use the words purported, to have sent a consolidated interim invoice to CLICO claiming $3.3 million in legal fees for the certain services rendered relative to the purchase of Sam Lord's Castle and related properties, purchase of Grant's Hotel Limited shareholding, litigation involving Marriott's Corporation and its successors, litigations involving Arbico Inc. And as I said, the lawyers were supposed to be a Miss Stewart, a Gail Prescott, Miss Deere, with the consultant being Mr. Morris King. Now this is the invoice. And the invoice was signed for payment by the chairman of CLICO, Mr. Leroy Paris. That check was issued by CLICO, took Thompson Associates on the 16th of January 2009, pursuant to the invoice being served. Now, is that invoice a true invoice, or is it a fraud? That is the first question. And the lawyers have been called now before the judicial managers that Thompson tried his best not to put in place. And they now have to give evidence under oath. And this is what they said on the 29th of January 2013. It says we refer because the judicial manager has written them, asking them about this transaction. It says we refer to your caption letter. We regret the delay in responding. We now provide you with the following responses. This is a Miss, let me tell you who's the name of the lady that wrote it. This is Miss Gail Prescott who wrote this. It says, we now provide you with the following responses. Having consulted with Mrs. Stewart and Mrs. Deere, whose name appear on the document labeled Consolidated Interim Invoice, and which purports to be an invoice of the firm Thompson and Associates, issued on 30th of December 2008. And this is the first thing they say. The copy of the invoice forwarded to us from your office is not consistent with the format used by the Office of Thompson and Associates Attorneys at Law in December 2008 or otherwise, which would have been authorized for issue by any of the attorneys named in the heading of that invoice. They say that this invoice does not conform to the way in which invoices prepared for payment, to get payment for CLICO. This is not a CLICO, this is not a Thompson Associates invoice such as existed on that day. That would have been authorized by issue by any of the attorneys at law. The searches by our accounts personnel have revealed that the invoice number 20067 is not an invoice number which was generated in the accounting program used by the firm of Thompson and Associates Attorney at Law in December 2008. The real law firm has no record that any such invoice ever generated from Thompson Associates, although it was sent to CLICO as a Thompson and Associates invoice for services rendered by Thompson and Associates. He says all invoices or letters of request for payments issued out of that office in December of 2008 or otherwise always bore the signature of either the attorney at law who had conduct of the particular matter or an authorized person from the accounts department, the address of the firm, and all contact information, including telephone and fax numbers. So he said any invoice coming from the real Thompson and Associates would be signed by the attorney dealing with the matter or somebody from the accounts department. This invoice against which $3.3 million has been paid is a fraud because it is not signed by any of the lawyers which this invoice purports to be acting on behalf of Thompson Associates. But Paris took it, knowing that it was a fraud, signed it for payment, and then sent $3.3 million to an entity that I can talk about. Now, this invoice can also be dismissed as the fraud that it is, because part of the $3.33 million was made up of $250,000 payable as retainers for Watson Brief for Morris King QC and junior counsel in the matter of Albert Crow Limited versus Grants Hotel. And Morris King has had to give evidence too before the judicial manager. That is why it was so important that the judicial manager should have been put in place. Because you have to go, he's an agent of the court, and you have to go and give evidence on the oath, and you can get charged for perjury if you tell them lies. Well, Morris King now was told that he get $250,000 for rendering services under this invoice. And on the 18th of January 2008 and 13, Morris King spoke in these terms, and I must read it slowly. He says, ladies and gentlemen, he's a polite man. He said, Ray CLICO International Life Insurance Company Limited. I refer to your letter dated January the 17th, 2013, read the above. So they wrote him on the 13th of January. And the man responded on the 18th. This is a good man. He said, please be advised that I did not represent CLICO Holdings Barbados Limited or any of its associates companies, nor did I receive a retainer or any fee from CLICO Holdings Barbados Limited or any of its associated companies in the matter Aberco Limited, Grants Hotel Limited. He said, I am not privy to any information on what fees, retainers, or other payments, if any, which junior counsel, whoever that be, may or may not have received in respect of the matter to which you refer. He said, I am not in the habit of preparing or settling invoices for legal work in which I am not involved and have not deviated from that habit in respect of the invoice to which you refer, nor am I in the habit of collecting fees for which I have not done or in respect of which I have not been briefed. In summary, I received no fee of $250,000 or any amount in respect of the matter to which you refer. So somebody, other than these poor little lawyers, sent an invoice to CLICO, unsigned, claiming that CLICO had to pay them $3.3 million, of which $250,000 had to go to Morris King for work rendered. And Morris says, poor me, I ain't doing no work. I have never yet claimed money for work not rendered. I received no fee. So that when this invoice was sent on to Paris, clearly there was somebody with larceny in their hearts. Not the three lawyers, nor the accounts departments, none of whom signed the invoice. Sent it on to Paris, and when Leroy Paris received it, he was in a position to know that it was a fraudulent invoice, it was an unsigned invoice, and as Morris King was saying in this letter, it was asking CLICO to pay Thompson Associates for work not rendered. This was an ultimate fraud. And Paris took up $3.3 million of your money and sent it over to Thompson Associates. I can come to what happened with that money soon. Now, the lawyers, poor things, haven't consulted among themselves because Thompson Associates has now been scattered to the wind. And these lawyers under oath says, in respect of your query, we note from the documents provided by you, a copy of which we presume to be the back of a check deposited with First Caribbean Bank account, and I'm not want to call the number because I want to encrypt people. Please be advised that the account to which this check was deposited, and this is the key, this check was sent by Thompson, by CLICO, purportedly to Thompson Associates as a law firm. Did it reach? And where did it go? These lawyers too have told the judicial manager, please be advised that the account to which this check was sent was not operated by either Miss Stewart, that's one of the lawyers, Miss Dare, or Miss Prescott, whose name appeared in the invoice. So this was not sent to Thompson Associates under these lawyers. We therefore possess, nor have we ever possessed any documentation regarding the operation of this account from said First Caribbean Bank, account number 9 something. And if you feel it is 9616, you can say so. So that check was sent from CLICO to Caribbean Associates. But the lawyers from Caribbean Associates said, Thompson Associates said, that the account to which it was deposited was an account that the company had never had. Had never had. So that this invoice, purporting to be an invoice from Thompson Associates, didn't come from the law firm, but was generated by some entity calling itself Thompson Associates. And the check was sent from CLICO to an account in the name of Thompson Associates that was not an account operated, as the lawyers have said, by the company itself. And then what happened when the check reached that account? Well, as you know, the judicial managers had earlier said as such, and I have to read it carefully for you. He says on January 16, 2009, a payment of $3.3 million was made to the law firm Thompson and Associates by CLICO Life Insurance. He goes on to say, we have been advised by CLICO that the $3.3 million was not for legal services, but was actually to the benefit of Mr. Leroy Paris, the former chairman of CLICO Insurance Life, and related to the partial payment of a gratuity. We have been advised that Mr. Paris acknowledges that this payment was related to the gratuity payments owed to him under his employment contract. So let me go back to the sequence. A contract goes from Thompson Associates or some entity purporting to be Thompson Associates to CLICO, purporting to ask for $3.3 million from CLICO for services rendered by Thompson and Associates on CLICO's behalf, an unsigned invoice. Paris himself signed and authorized the payment, knowing that this amount in this fraudulent invoice was not intended to be payment to Thompson Associates for services rendered, but was intended to go through a false account or some other account to come back to him as the first part of his gratuity. So that there was a complete conspiracy to defraud, a false invoice, purporting to ask CLICO to pay from services not rendered on its behalf, an invoice that is really not an invoice of the company itself. Paris, knowing that the request for payment for services was not really legitimate, signs it and sends over the check. It goes to an account other than the company account, and Paris drew that check. Paris drew that check, went to an account in First Caribbean, not operated by the real Thompson company, some parallel account, and they took the money and paid it over to Leroy Paris. Now, if you connect the dots, this is a conspiracy to defraud. That somebody at Thompson Associates, not the accounting staff because they did not sign, and this is the evidence given by the lawyers, that they didn't sign this invoice, nor anybody from the accounting staff didn't sign it. It went requesting money for services, which was the person who sent this invoice knew that it was requesting payment for services not rendered. Paris knew that too. He sent it back in full amount, knowing that it was going to benefit him, and it went to an account bearing the name of Thompson. Now, you know, if you put money in an account, it can only be received by account if that is an account that exists. So if there was another account that was not a company account carrying the name of Thompson Associates, the legitimate question is, who was operating this other account that was not the company's account that received the money from CLICO to pass on to Paris? Now, it has to be somebody carrying the name of Thompson. It would have to be somebody carrying the name of Thompson. I got a checkbook. Owen and Julie Arthur. If you come and name Deborah something, you cannot sign my checks. Nor can you go to the bank and say, I am coming. I am purporting to be either Owen and Julie Arthur, and that is my account, and I want money from it. So this money was put in an account, not operated by the company. And the body operating that account knew that it was put there under fraudulent purposes and took up the policyholders' money and gave $3.3 million of your money to a man called Leroy Paris under the pretext that this was for legal services rendered by Thompson Associates. So who is the Thompson Associates that had this parallel? It was not the lawyers. It was, did they have an office manager? Now, at that time, David Thompson was the prime minister because all this happened when Thompson was the prime minister. He didn't dead yet. This is the kind of thing that would make a man dead, though. Wouldn't know how to face this boy. So, look, let me get real. An invoice for $3 million plus purportedly issued by Thompson Associates for services legally rendered by CLICO. One of the people who name was referenced as having provided service said, not me. And that person is not a Labour Party person, is Morris King QC. So I think we can believe Morris King that they use his name fraudulently. And Morris, I ain't come out here to embarrass you, but you have a duty to tell the people of Barbados the truth because there is a conspiracy of silence on this matter all across the Democratic Labour Party. And St. Clair will all know about this. And that's why they don't want to come and act on this, because we will have to ask questions about all these things. The payment of the invoice was approved by Paris for him, knowing it that it was really not for services rendered, but to give him money as a gratuity. I believe that's a fraud. And you know, I think we have a thing called that the proceeds from a crime can be seized. And if you know that you're doing something fraudulent and you benefit to the extent of $3.3 million, we're not going to get pursued. But Paris can't be walking around all the time in his fine Italian suits and eating and going out with fine dining, appearing with the Minister of Finance with a champagne in his hand, knowing that this fraud was perpetrated on the people in CLICO. And you know, some people on who this fraud was perpetrated have died waiting. I had a friend, a wonderful Barbadian named Courage Pilgrim, 90 years old, and he put his savings in CLICO. And he died recently. He said, Owen Arthur, he said, I am in the departure lounge awaiting the final boarding call. Please help me get back my money. That man died waiting. And there are many of you out there waiting We have told this government, set aside the CLICO day, let us deal with this on the floor of Parliament. And they wouldn't bring it, because this would have to be exposed. Now, the investigations are carried out by the judicial manager, not me, and the former, and this is the point, the former associates of Thompson Law Company, because they have been scattered now, saying that this invoice is not in the form issued by CLICO. The invoice was a fraud. But not in the form issued by Thompson. It is a fraud. Would you pay on an unsigned invoice? Not even $3. But this is $3.3 million sent to CLICO, and the man take up and sign it. Like, he didn't sign it as though he's a man who can write enough, because he just a little scribble. But he signed it. And as I said, Morris King disassociated himself from it. So the question is, who was in control of the account to which a check in the name of Thompson's associate was deposited if the law partners had no control over it? Isn't that a simple, honest question that has to be asked? The law partners said that the check was not sent to anything under our control. So out there has to be an account carrying the name of Thompson Associate that received this check and decided that they could pay it to Leroy Paris. And we need to be told that if the lawyers of the company were not in control of it, if the accounts, the people had nothing to do with it, who was in control of the account? And who signed the check that was sent from that account at First Caribbean to Paris in the amount? We need to be told these things. And you know, this is about justice. Because if the account carries the name Thompson, who would have access to such funds? Because not the law company. So there's an account out there carrying the name Thompson that somebody has access to. And don't you think at a time when we have to go to Parliament and ask you, the taxpayers, to come forward now and dig in your pockets to help to settle the CLICO matter, that we have to be told about this separate account carrying the name Thompson that somebody has control over, that can pick up and write a check for $3 million to give to Leroy Paris? It's a legitimate issue, isn't it true? And at the time when, you know, Paris is still walking around as though he is large and in charge, and that none of the members of the Democratic Labour Party are prepared to disassociate himself from him. This stands as a stain on the governance of this country, because if they know, as they must know, but it seems to me that they are almost by implications virtually wanting to either wink at it or be accomplices into something that they know is wrong. Christian Club, when you are in Paris company, don't you feel that you should ask him how he come to get the $3.3 million from out an account that was not under the control of Thompson, the real Thompson Associates? Don't you think that when you're patient, those tall drinks, that you can pause and say, Leroy, but you could tell me though. And I'm sure that Leroy would tell him that everywhere now, my boy goes St. Glucose, Paris is with him. And every one of the meetings of the Democratic Labour Party, Paris is there. And this $3.3 million, you wonder what Paris has started to do with it. Because he's a generous man. But so therefore, you know, Friend Stewart, you speak about being a man of integrity, truthfulness, and honesty. Well, look, you got 24 hours to be honest with the people of Barbados. You say you got a day in this campaign. That is $3.3 million of fraud. A fraud. Your pal is clearly at the center of the fraud. Tell the people the truth now. Leadership that you can trust. Tell us, Mr. Frandel, what role your pal played in this. And if you are truthful and trustworthy, please tell us why it is that the law courts, if a small man pick up by accident a tin of sardines, that he may have to face the courts, but a man is, and this is, I am now in the bottom of the label now. This man knew that this was a fraud, engaged in a fraud, profit from a fraud, and he is walking about Barbados. Pump setting. And you got people, some of my neighbors, and I'm speaking to them tonight, hurting. Don't know whether they're coming or going. And Paris drew $3.3 million on the false pretenses, with the complicity of somebody named Thompson. Somebody carrying the name of Thompson. So we need to get the facts. I know we cannot live in a country that is so unjust. This is an unjust act. It cannot stand. Barbados can never be the same again if a man is allowed to do this and to get away with it. So tonight, I appeal to you in the name of the book of Amos. Frandel, you got a lot of old talk and sweet talk. Amos chapter 5 verse 10-3 tells you, take thou away from me the noise of thy songs, for I will not hear the melody of thy violins. And 24 is what I want to come to. But let justice, Frandel, run down as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream. Good night, and God bless each and every one of you. And on to victory!
Ladies and gentlemen, come February the 21st, go out and vote for a competent and caring government. Vote in your numbers. Here in St. James, South for Sandra Husbands. Across the length and breadth of Barbados, vote for the candidates of the Barbados Labour Party, and make sure that you and your children and your children's children put your faith and your confidence in this, the Barbados Labour Party, to take us to higher and higher levels of personal prosperity and national development. Good night, God bless, and vote Barbados Labour Party.